So in the past 24 hours, Russian forces have been on the attack, advancing in areas like Kupiansk, Pokrovsk, and Orikhiv. Now, in those first two locations, it's very similar to what we've seen in recent weeks and months. Small groups of infiltrators, 2, 3, 4 Russian soldiers moving at a time, digging in and kind of waiting for reinforcements to show up, which does move Russian control on the map. But to the southwest, in Zaparisia, we actually saw another large-scale Russian armored assault, which, of course, resulted in multiple Russian vehicles being destroyed and countless Russian soldiers killed. However, despite that, it does look like Russian forces were able to gain a foothold and take a new village in the Zaparisia direction. Oh, also, and I'll save it for the very end here, I got a really nice video yesterday from the team over at Ukraine Aid Operations showing a lot of the units saying thank you to you all for all of the equipment that we provided through fundraisers over the course of the last couple months. Again, that'll be at the very end of today's video. So diving into what we know, we're going to take a look at a couple statements here from Russian mill bloggers as well as Ukrainian. I do want to start with a map to give you an idea of the areas we're going to be looking at. Today I'm using Suryak map. This will be linked in the description below. I have found this map to be a little more quickly updated when we're talking about Russian advances. So when we're looking at things that may have transpired over the last 6 or 12 hours, I feel like this is a better bet. So starting out right in the middle here with Pokrovsk. This, of course, being an area of some of the heaviest fighting all across the front over the course of the last year. The city center right here, you can start to see Russian forces moving into. But zooming out a little bit for the bigger picture, Two Majors says in the Pokrovsk direction, the situation remains dynamic and extremely tense. On the northern flank, heavy fighting continues on the approaches to Zoloty Kolodets near Kucherev Yar and Shakov. So these couple areas up here, and for this, I think it's actually worthwhile going over to Deep State map, a little more, I think there's actually a little more clarity here. So this was a couple months ago. We saw Russian forces advance through the Ukrainian lines in large numbers overall, small numbers at a time. And what we saw since then was the inability for Russia to really reinforce this position. But according to Two Majors, there is still fighting happening as far north as Kucherev Yar. He also adds that there is continued fighting and some advances near Shakov. This is the area here that we saw last week 3 Russian armored assaults attempt to try to advance in this area from what we can best tell. So again, on this map, due northeast of Pokrovsk. The best we can tell based off the footage available, and even Russians were complaining about this for what it's worth. Russian mill bloggers were saying, so we've learned nothing from Volodar and Avdiivka, where large armored assaults in daylight trying to go unnoticed are pretty quickly met with Ukrainian drone strikes, not even ATGMs. Most of them didn't even get within that range. Drones and artillery hammered the Russian forces. However, it does look, at least according to Russian sources right now, that some progress may have been made during the course of those attacks. But again, we're talking about relatively small advance at the cost of, it might have been a battalion's worth of armor that was destroyed in that advance. So let's keep that in mind. Turning back to Two Majors, he says Russian small groups have begun operating on the eastern outskirts of Minograd, so here to the east of Pokrovsk. He said, based on objective control, we can say that the Russian armed forces entry into the village from the Moskovsky side, so over here, directly to the east. However, they do not yet have full control of the village. In Pokrovsk, he says the gray zone is gradually expanding. Pairs and triples of assault troops and reconnaissance units are working in different parts of the city, slowly advancing towards the central area. And that's what we've seen just in the last couple days here. It's notable we're not seeing, again, large Russian armored assaults here. It's small groups of Russian soldiers, 2s and 3s, that move forward. And we've got some video here in a second of showing how Ukraine is countering that. But it's been very slow, but continually moving into new areas of Pokrovsk. Ukraine Control Map put out a statement saying, quote, units from the 7th Air Assault Corps report eliminating Russian troops deep inside of central Pokrovsk. Disturbingly, Russian forces also massacred Ukrainian civilians in the town, treating them with horrific disregard. I will link a couple of those reports in the description below. It's incredibly graphic. The videos and the pictures we have of very clearly civilians that have been killed by Russian forces in Pokrovsk. So these were civilians that opted to stay or could not leave for any number of reasons. And as Russian forces have moved in, again, it is not you wake up and you've got a battalion of Russians the next block over. It's 1, 2 at a time kind of sneaking in. And as they've done so, there are increasing reports that they are targeting civilians that remain. Now, in response to that and kind of the way that Ukraine is countering these infiltration tactics, we got a video that just came out showing the Ukrainian 3rd Special Ops Regiment clearing through some areas of Pokrovsk. So this footage could be very, very recent, like in the last couple days. And you'll see in this footage, they're moving through some of these areas, and what they're doing is they're hunting down, and in this case, capturing Russian soldiers that are just off on their own, 1, 2, 3 at a time. And that's unusual. This isn't something we see in Western militaries. We just don't have a situation where a singular soldier of ours is, essentially behind enemy lines just waiting. I mean, this is not a military fortification he's in. They're finding basements and cellars and abandoned buildings to kind of sit in with radios at times to try to call additional Russian forces forward. But even when those elements move forward, it's not a company-size element or a platoon coming to reinforce. It's another 1 or 2 that are slowly moving towards their position. So you can see as the Ukrainians are moving through here, hunting down and capturing these Russians, the challenge here, right? This is not a continuous line of Ukrainian forces, so there are gaps, and it provides the ability for Russian forces to move through. And then the response that we're seeing right now in Pokrovsk, and we saw north of Pokrovsk, carried out by Azov, I want to say 93rd Brigade and others recently, is kind of moving through and countering these with kind of hunter-killer teams is the best way to put it. Now, sticking with 2 majors back here at Pokrovsk, he says supplying the armed forces of Ukraine garrison is still possible, but involves significant risk. Real vehicle graveyards are already forming in the city's surroundings. In the central part, troops are seeking to establish themselves on the railway station territory. So right here in the middle, you see the railway station. He says if Russian forces manage to hold the forward line, the Ukrainian positions south of the neighborhoods will soon find themselves surrounded. So however many Ukrainian forces are still holed up in some of these areas here. He says over the past 2 weeks, Russian armed forces have achieved significant success in the urban area. This may indicate the exhaustion of the enemy's resources and changes in Russian command approaches after unsuccessful attempts to establish a foothold in August. He says, however, at the same time, it should be noted that due to constant drone attacks, it is too early to speak of stable control over the built-up area. The high density of drones prevents long-term accumulation or building retention, turning any personnel concentrations into priority targets for aviation and artillery. This applies equally to both sides. In fact, we had a video come out from Ukraine that I'll play here in a moment showing that they identified some of these Russian infiltrators moving through their lines. They say that this was a group that was murdering civilians, and while they weren't able to attack them the moment they saw them, they identified where they went, where they decided to hole up, and then they went after them with a couple drones, eliminating that position. So in this case, you're talking just a couple Russian soldiers, but they are being tracked. There are eyes in the sky everywhere, and 2 majors concedes that, saying it's very, very challenging for either side to build up any sizable amount of forces. Now, turning back to the Kupiansk direction, where we have seen a continual buildup of Russian forces here, it's a bit to the north. So again, sticking with Syriac map here, we are seeing an advance in Kupiansk and have for a couple weeks now into the actual city of Kupiansk itself. So you'll see the red here is territory claimed by Russian forces. Again, going with 2 majors, he says, quote, in the Kupiansk direction, fierce battles are ongoing for the city and surrounding areas. Russian troops are advancing on several sectors, gradually reducing the enemy's control zone on the left bank of the Oskil River. That is the river moving through here. You can see it separates the lines a little bit to the north and then further south in Ukrainian-held territory. He says in Kupiansk, Russian unit advancements have been recorded within the urban area west of the Oskil River. So right here on the map. Footage shows assault groups entering new districts, though the overall situation remains obscured by the fog of war. The Ukrainian side is moving reinforcements, seeking to hold the city center and river crossings. However, no full-scale reserve deployment on the eastern bank is observed. The enemy fears falling into a trap due to strikes on bridges and pontoons. So this is going to be a question over here. They're talking about the east bank. This territory here still held by Ukrainian forces. For some time, it has been harder and harder to get reinforcements across the Oskil River, not just here in Kupiansk, which some of these bridgeheads now controlled by Russian forces, but even further south. For some time, Russia has been going after these bridges with FABs, the long-range guided bombs, to destroy these river crossings. And when Ukraine goes to set up pontoons, they're pretty quickly noticed, right? We've seen this in both cases. It's very, very hard in this drone-saturated environment to set up any sort of long-term river crossings, and then moving small boats over one at a time is just not going to keep a large number of forces supplied for a period of time. He says the situation is developing in favor of Russian forces. The enemy is losing strongholds, and holding the bridgehead during Kupiansk battles under systemic crossing strikes is a challenging task. Again, Kupiansk, we are seeing area falling to Russian forces. A lot of the video footage coming out of this area shows, again, small elements, 2, 3, 4 Russians at a time instead of any sort of large concerted attack. The situation down here in the southwest, a little bit different. And we've got some conflicting reports in this scenario where it's Deep State Map actually put out a statement saying all across this front, a wide area of the front from Mali Sherbaki all the way over to Mala Tumchaka, which we're going to have more information on this one here in a second, large Russian armored assaults. And this area here is where it looks like Russia may have gained a foothold in the outskirts of this village. Deep State Map released some footage here, and this is one where you're going to see a lot of destruction of Russian armored vehicles and personnel, but at the same time, reports from Russia that they actually made an advance and were able to gain a foothold. Again, this speaks to the breadth of the offensive that was carried out just in the last couple days in the Orikhiv direction. Deep State Map says yesterday the enemy launched a series of attacks across a fairly wide front section. While at most points the enemy was met with fire during their advance to the line of combat contact, the assault on Mala Tumchaka drew the most attention, where the Russians managed to reach the center of the village. The enemy carried out assault actions in several ways, using heavy equipment with infantry and motorcycles, aiming to quickly penetrate deep into the territory, disperse across the area, hide among the ruins, and establish a foothold there. Most of the armored vehicles with infantry were hit and destroyed, but some groups managed to reach the village. In talking about the updated map and what they're going to do there, they say the map has not changed and will not change for now. This was a quick assault with a lottery-like chance for success, and the near future will show whether they manage to establish themselves there or build logistics for constant attempts to penetrate the village, which has not happened so often before, they even mark it in gray. They say the Ukrainian Defense Forces immediately began clearing operations working against the infantry in particular. This can be seen in the footage of the tank working against the Russians who were holed up in a house, as well as tank crews moving out to meet enemy's equipment conducting the assault. We are clarifying information that will be later reflected on the map. In fact, the Ukrainian 17th Army Corps put out footage as well, saying that they were attacked with up to 2 companies worth of Russian forces. 26 total pieces of equipment, they say, were destroyed. That includes 2 tanks, 12 BMPs, 6 BTRs, and 2 kind of ATVs, BBM Tigers. Now, turning over to the Russian series of events here, coming from Paratrooper Diaries, he says at Malaya Tumchaka, Zaparisia front, our forces have broken through. So again, on the map, showing this small area here where Russia says that they have advanced and they have started to dig in. He says after prolonged preparation to destroy enemy minefields, UAV launch points, and artillery positions by the forces of the 4th Guards military base, our troops created a powerful armored fist with electronic warfare, hedgehogs, and grills. By creating false strike directions and thoroughly studying the enemy with a skillful unified use of diverse forces means that the 58th Guards Combined Army, our forces occupied 3/4 of the village and managed to consolidate their position. Infantry from the 42nd Guards Motor Rifle Division was operating on the ground. Unfortunately, there are losses in armored vehicles and personnel, but they are minimal. He says we are to entrench ourselves in the positions, organize logistics, and locate the annoying HIMARS that the enemy has brought in to support their forces. Again, minimal probably is subjective when looking at the volume of tanks and armored vehicles that were destroyed, again, in moving the line. And this is the challenge in this conflict, right? It is definitely reached an attritional phase of the war, but a lot of that is measured in territory along the front, as Russia no doubt still wants to take and hold large patches of Ukrainian territory, certainly in the east, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaparisia, and Kherson. So the Russian advances and territorial changes are important in that sense, and we have to weigh the cost of doing so. And in some of these videos in the last couple of weeks, I mean, again, I think we've probably seen just in 3 or 4 attacks total, arguably 2 to 3 full battalions of Russian armored vehicles destroyed. It's been a lot, like a lot more than normal. So is that worth it for the relatively small gains? And, you know, there are people inside of Russia that say no. They say this is far too costly. How are we not learning from these mistakes? Others, however, cheering on that there are now a couple new areas from Kupiansk in the northeast down to Pokrovsk over to the Orikhiv direction here, Malatimchaka, where Russia can say to their citizens, hey, look, we are making advances. We are continually on the assault. We are taking more and more territory. But either way, there's definitely been an uptick in some larger Russian assaults here in the last couple weeks. We'll see how long that actually continues. But hey, let's end this on a positive note. I got a video here from Ukraine Aid Operations as a thank you to you all for everything you've done to provide all sorts of equipment to a number of Ukrainian units across the east over the course of the last couple months. Let's give that a quick look.
Це підрозділ механізованого батальйону 3-ї окремої штурмової бригади. Висловлюємо щиру вдячність Престону Стюарту, його спільноті.
Ми бійці 1-го МПП 93-ї бригади. Дякуємо волонтерам, дякуємо ютуб-каналу Престона за відкриті збори на FPV-дрони, дрони Mavic.
4-ї окремої механізованої бригади 3-го батальйону 8-ї роти. Окрема велика подяка від каналу Престона за проведення рецензії. Бійці 43-ї МБР Небесна Мар. Висловлюємо щиру подяку Ukrainian Aid Op.
Подяка UAO та відеоканалу Престона і фандрейзингу. Дякуємо UAO та відеоканалу Престона і фандрейзингу, які
Бійці 73-го центру ССО дякують за допомогу у вигляді тепловізійних дронів. Окрема подяка YouTube-каналу Стюарта Престона.
Дякуємо ютуб-каналу Престона.
Город там висловлює подяку. Йо-йо, також особлива подяка YouTube каналу Preston.
Дякуємо організації United Aid and Logistics та Preston Stewart за 10 років.
So hope to have more details on recent fundraisers here soon. The Azov guys just got a bunch of new equipment delivered to them from a Zynga's Paw fundraiser we did a couple months ago. Waiting for some additional videos to share all of that, but it's all moving in the right direction thanks to your all's generosity. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.